It's go time. It's go time. Let's do this.
And somehow we ended up with sound issues again. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. And with that all, you missed everything I said about all of the nonsense happening before for the last 5 minutes of stream. It's probably fine, though. Maybe someone will remember to chop off the first 5 minutes of this one when we put it on YouTube. But it's unlikely, so... Just because I'm on today does not mean I'm likely to have a lot to say, though. It depends on who joins in and what the main focus of a specific player is in their practice. But for now, since we don't have any really strong intentions and we are expected to see less of the team today, as well as no actual play from the stream station, you can expect it to be somewhat quiet unless specific people join and we end up doing the analysis so that others can make a bit more progress. Generally, unless someone else specifically joins into play, you should be expecting to see a lot of Lucia versus Mikali. These two players are still not quite at the point where they've got a whole large plan for each other, and the two characters are relatively evenly matched in specific ways, since Lucia's wind up to throw out her zoning is clear enough that Nakali will normally be able to get through it if playing defensively. In fact, if they both play fairly safe against each other, there's not an easy way for either character to get a big advantage. Spacing wise, if it's off, Lucia can go on the offense. And if she is continually failing spacing, then it's much more likely that Nakali will get some big damage if the player uses the time to build up meter and get to the right spaces for big punishes such as this one. But overall, both characters benefit from playing the match fairly safely, not necessarily without much movement or buttons, but even their footsies tends to be a little bit more timid. You're not necessarily trying to bait your opponent into anything, you're just pushing them constantly to the best spot for your fighting. And therefore, I'm unlikely to have a lot to say because it's a lot of safe play and footsies. Anything else, such as trying to deal with either character's first order strategy, well, in this matchup you can't really say that either one has a first order strategy. They're both just able to play it out without worrying too much about it.
Round 2. Fight. Nakali wins.
time.
Round 1. Fight!
If there is anything you could say to be the first order strategy of this, it is what you just saw. Playing safely and skillfully enough, Nikali will eventually push Lucia to the corner, as she doesn't really have a lot of tricky ways to cross up situations or avoid getting into that. He has enough knockback and enough control of position that he will eventually get her back there. Simply again because it's too easy to get through her stuff if she puts in the effort to throw out fireballs. And even EX moves will just get blocked. She's not making any progress forward, and she has one move basically that she can use to charge in, which Nikali's sweep beats. Overall, therefore, getting her to the corner can be a strategy you try to use, but from once you've got her there, you still have to be able to corner guard, and she's not the easiest character to corner guard, simply because she will push you back in various ways. If you move to a position where you normally would be able to easily counter someone's jump out, she will push you even further back one way or the other, and you have to be really ready for both of those things. It's a good thing to be practicing against the character though. If you are a friend of someone or a rival of someone who plays Lucia well enough, you'll probably get a lot more corner guard practice than you do on nearly any other character in the game. With other characters, there's always something they can do, however crazy, however meter intensive or whatever, to get them out of the situation altogether. But Lucia seems to lack this, except through using like some of the most complicated and meter intensive options possible in the game. So once you've pushed her back, you can mostly play it out and watch for your options for managing to counter her. It's not that she has nothing, it's that usually the options she has are extremely big bets with big opportunities for you as the other person to punish. And at that point, that's what corner guard really is. Your opponent always has some option, it's just that the options are bad, and if you can bait them into trying to use one because they can't seem to manage much else, you might get a really big punish, and they're still in the corner.
Round 2. Fight!
Over here! Out of my way! Out of my way! Over here! Come back to me! Shut off! Out of my way! Over here!
Nikali wins. Let's do this.
Well, based on the ping bars, I have no idea how laggy this is between these two, but I'll get a report on the lag levels a bit later, which will probably inform whether or not the situation is too difficult for the wolf to do the things required. Ken is one of the harder characters to fight in this game in lag because of one specific aspect of the character's design. If you let Ken too near you after a certain amount of hits of defense on your end, you will have a difficult anti-air to do. And for Nikali, this anti-air is particularly difficult.
Fight.
Often this means that your big goal when Ken is poking at you on the ground is actually to backdash out of the situation because it can't possibly get too much worse. Some characters can walk forward, but you see it demonstrated there. If you're getting hit on the ground, be careful because Ken will usually be able to jump at you. And you have to be ready for that jump. Fortunately, he also doesn't have a lot of good options right after it. So as you can see here, he generally jumps there, which is the reason why we considered it worthwhile to just put as a part of KenBot. That's just part of how Ken as a character is designed to work. He will poke you a couple of times on the ground, usually with something that won't let you walk away, and then jump over your head. Understanding your anti-air options, or just your getting out of the way options, can be super important therefore. But the laggier it is, the harder it is to make sure that you've got the timing right for whatever it is you want to do. Even 3 to 5 frames difference in recognizing did they actually jump or not is often too little too late. And eventually if your opponent realizes that they're either getting anti-aired or it's just not working for some other reason, he does have other buttons he can hit, they just don't normally do any good. But they do a lot of good against someone who has decided to go back into the space instead of trying to actually anti-air or maybe even late dash forward. So, regardless of how well your opponent is playing as a generality, this isn't really a part of Ken play that we seem to find that people can give up. It's too difficult at the mid-levels to manage to play Ken well without using this option at some point. But it makes sense that that's that way because it's a very strong option.
Final round.
Eventually your opponent will be overwhelmed by everything else going on and you will be able to get this jump done. It's particularly helpful if you start mixing it up and not jumping immediately. Because if you just jump immediately, yes, most people will be able to react and just like walk out of it as you just saw the wolf do, or even get better anti-airs that they have basically practiced enough to have on deck for that scenario. Similar things happen when you jump or move into Ken's threat range and he has a good enough timing for his own jump. But you can see it play out repeatedly here. It's a really important skill to have. So it's not that this character, Ken as a generality, feels like a character that just jumps too much sometimes, but he's not jumping too much. He's definitely jumping the quote-unquote correct amount. And it's part of his offense. You're supposed to have a way to deal with it, and it's supposed to be difficult. Recognizing which way Ken has decided to do this today is part of the challenge. And in general, for many characters, it really isn't very rewarding to actually stop him. You're much better off finding a way to prevent yourself from being in that situation in the first place. But Ken is quick at moving and good at whiff punishes, so you don't really get to keep him out of that space. And if you didn't manage to defend against one jump, you're probably going to end up in a situation where you have to deal with it next. So, try not to get too discouraged if this is a thing that's getting into your skin, basically. You've got to deal with it because it's part of the character. And if you really can't manage to easily, There's usually some trick to it for your own character that you just don't necessarily immediately think of. If worse comes to worse and you feel like, oh, I could win this match if I could just not have that happen to me. One thing you can try to remember is that Ken can't actually set this up without doing the last hit of the string, and therefore you can just re-reversal that hit. He's always too far away to actually throw you, I think, on every character, and even though he can sometimes block it if you're slow or if your character doesn't have a particularly good re-reversal, generally it's fine. They'll probably already be committed to whether or not they're going to jump after it, and therefore you shouldn't have too many problems there. So here is this relatively offense-based character that if you can manage to keep him out of the position he wants to get into, you just have to beat him in footsies, and he's not terribly strong in footsies in this game. Unless you are a character who has to hit buttons in order to make sure he doesn't get to the spot. In which case he's great in footsies. Necalli is not really one of those characters. Necalli has a lot of freedom in how he deals with Ken because he doesn't have to really worry about fireballs, and has an uppercut that can be used properly against the jump at many ranges. It rises high enough and it doesn't go under things, unlike a couple of unfortunate people. Some characters, even if you do it relatively early, in fact, specifically if you do it early, you will find yourself in a situation where your character has gone under Ken's jump instead of hitting him. Depending on the situation, this might lead to you getting crush counters, but it, again, depends on the character. Gives up the corner guard. With good enough reason in this case. But a little bit poor on the judgment, and only saved by the opponent not being able to properly do the finish after the Shinryukin.
Final round. Fight.
Necalli can get pretty good damage out of weird situations in this matchup by having enough meter, but once put into basically the blender that you're looking at here, it doesn't really work out too well. You have to be ready to do this constantly. Fortunately, Necalli is one of those characters that can just deal with this by doing a neutral jump medium punch. This is actually true of a lot of characters in this game, but it's not specifically a thing that works on every Ken player because there are ways for Ken to make this not work out well. Is a setup for the thing? It is not. And I suppose I will get the report on whether or not it was too laggy in general. Because as I said, while I'm talking about this as if, well, here's just the thing you do, from the very beginning the point was, if it's too laggy, you don't have time to react enough to do it. Particularly if the characters are not the style that are able to do it easily.
Let's do this. Round one. Fight!
Double. Set. Over. Stop that. Over here. Hey. Double. Set. Back.
Round two. Fight!
Lucia is one of the characters in this game with the generally least difficulty in dealing with this particular Ken style. She has an uppercut that will generally manage to catch him more often than not, can slide out of the other situations without having to think too hard about it, and still actually has the jump medium punch option. Not only that, but her damage is high enough when Ken does get baited into something, but she doesn't have to win consistently through all interactions. Meaning that the key core is, as always, don't expect a player is able to or willing to play footsies unless they've proven that they actually have that skill. You don't start expecting footsies until people are in platinum now. And honestly, sometimes not then either.
Ken wins.
As they may, especially in lounges, not be playing a main character, and without understanding a character well enough, it's more likely that people are going to be using gimmicks than footsies. They'll learn 2 good footsie buttons and that's probably it, which is a lot less than you'd expect to be necessary at that level, but
Fight!
it depends on how gimmicky the other character is. And Ken is not a particularly gimmicky character in the first place, so he actually does have a lot of good options there. Tactically, you actually want to uppercut earlier as Ken in this matchup when Lucia doesn't actually have enough meter to get big punishes on you. Or when you just have a lot of health and don't care. Now, our Lucia definitely needs to practice a bit more on specific things to get more damage as a generality, but the overall idea still more or less works out. If you've got enough of it, you will make her use up the meter and therefore make it more likely that she won't have great enough offense to push through you. And if you do really need to uppercut next time, you're probably okay.
Round two.
She's also a character who tends to put herself in positions where a heavy uppercut from Ken or Ryu, more so Ken than Ryu because he has better reach, will in fact get you good damage in footsie situations. Therefore, this is one of the matches where, regardless of whether or not it's actually particularly laggy, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's going to be heavily decided by that. If you saw a lot of throws being involved in non-defensive situations where people just walk up to you and throw you, I definitely see it then as, oh, the lag is causing this to go down this way. But overall, that's not what you should be expecting here.
It's go time.
Well, the report was that it is jittery lag, which, while it is difficult to do the thing required against this Ken style, bear in mind that, again, the point isn't really to deal with this. Even when the lag isn't necessarily overwhelming you, the Ken player has options to make your life harder enough that you would still have to learn to do this on the fly with maximum stress. So the lag in this case is probably more so simulating the stress of fighting a particularly good player doing the same thing. Another large problem that comes up in this match type often is that you can't really tell how good a Ken player is until you can stop them from doing this, because it's one of their main tactics, and they should in fact convert off it every time it works. So if you keep on getting converted on, keep on getting placed in that position, they're going to keep on doing it, and that's just the match. There's definitely some irritations in older games where you really can't prevent a gimmick well enough. It's a massive execution test, and your opponent will spam it until you lose. But we are in the era of games where you probably could manage to get your way out of the situation with a little more focus than the standard for the old games. So here, for example, our Necalli probably should have walked back a little bit, simply because corner guard is already needed to be set up, and Ken is way too dangerous to be standing that close to, as this is a character that will manage to carry you directly back to the middle of the screen off a crouch medium kick. But part of the difficulty of corner guard is understanding when your opponent is likely to actually make their move, and being in the right position that your button wins out harder than theirs. Which is the thing that DeWolf is basically suffering through right now. Moving back out of Ken's range generally means he's either going to run at you or jump, and Necalli's crouch heavy punch beats both these options. Consistently, I think. Ken can do other things, but he's mostly done just spending meter to get a tiny bit of damage, so you generally don't care. It's almost a good reason to default to using the other V skill in this matchup, just to get out of the corner, because Necalli does not need to let Ken out of it. Even there, I don't think DeWolf actually needed to reposition for the crouch heavy punch to work. I think it would have just worked. It might have traded, but in general, assume that Necalli has a lot of advantage there. Position is correct. Now nothing particular will happen. And Ken does not like getting hit by that move. It does not do a lot of damage, but the situation that it sets up for Necalli is far too good, forcing Ken to have to basically guess.
I did it. Final round. Fight.
Any character that can put you in a position where you have to uppercut after their light kick is going to put you in misery. Consistently. Another good setup, and here's corner guard, but again, noting again that the only actual warning I got here was that this was jittery lag. Jittery lag is generally not enough to cause you to fail your corner guard, because your corner guard is so heavily under your own control. You should, after a while of practicing, recognize my opponent is going to jump. They're not going to take another option. They're usually not capable of taking another option that is any threat to you. And a lot of the time, they'll just die outright if they try. Now, if the opposing character has a way to get around this, a way to get out of the corner without using much energy that you can't chase down and punish, then yes, your corner guard isn't perfect. But against generally the quote-unquote Shoto characters, except for you with a really specific execution, you can always get them. they will have to use another option altogether to get out because they don't have a quick move that allows them to rush at you and still be either plus advantaged in frames or at least safe-ish. Even when they have these options, these moves are often unsafe to just do when they feel like. So you can beat them not by attacking them while they're in the corner, but just guarding the spot and being ready when they jump, because they're going to jump. Once you've convinced people not to jump out of the corner, then you can start thinking about other options that your own character has. But honestly, Nikali is not so great at this. He doesn't have a ton of great options in that space. You can try to hit with the absolute maximum range of his stomp, I think. Or get into their face and push them, just annoy, get a little bit more pressure on for no specific reason other than white health buildup. It's probably getting more laggy though. From the look of it, it is jittering more on this side in a way that's likely leading to problems. Still, while I wouldn't go so far as to say you should be able to do this anyway, it is definitely a situation where it comes up because you simply shouldn't be expecting much else from your opponent. Even with Ken's extremely fast dash, you generally will not get dashed on and thrown if you are on defense in the corner guard position already.
Round 2. Fight.
And again, at this level of play, especially now, don't assume your opponent is going to attempt to play footsies unless they prove it. You should always be expecting a jump or for them to back off more. This can be a hard thing to change mindset-wise if you're used to playing on the level where people play footsies a lot. But this is part of the purpose of bots, because our Ken bot also does not play footsies, intentionally, very intentionally does not play any footsies. Simply because the expectation for what Ken wants to do, you must learn to defeat his jump first before any footsies is ever likely to happen. He will hit buttons, but those buttons are just to push you back to where he can do that. And while we didn't necessarily get the bot to the point where it is capable of perfectly emulating the thing you're seeing, it can definitely get up there. So, this is probably lag, as noted, but in general, if your Ken bot is put in even slightly correctly, you will eventually be taught to deal with this. And the specific aspects of how to deal with it against an opponent who doesn't really have another strategy should be something you can clear just by practicing with it.
Let's do this. one. Fight!
Perdón! Out of my way! Over here! Out of my way! Just kick! Safe! Over here! Told ya!
Actually, part of the difficulty you're seeing here is that if one uses the heavy uppercut, you're more likely to be unsafe. But if you use the medium one, you don't get the invincibility against the sorts of things required, nor do you have the reach required. So it's functionally not doing you much good, except if you are expecting Lucia to attack you. If you think she's going to attack, by all means hit the medium, just for the sake of having the option. Because if you were wrong and your opponent wasn't going to attack you, then that was a judgment error, more so than a you should never do this ever. But if you're trying to get through stuff that she's putting out toward you and you're in the correct position, the heavy uppercut is just as helpful. If not more so. And she isn't quite Alex tier where you have a good use for the light one. And that's her problem. Well, rather, it's Ken's problem in this matchup. As noted, she's not likely to fail that. The way her uppercut works, it generally shuts down this tendency that Ken has to jump at that space. Honestly, making her, in a weird way, one of the easier characters to pick up back then, simply because she could consistently beat that strategy from both Ken and Akuma. So it comes down to the same thing. You don't really have to play it defensively, but don't make too many assumptions about what your opponent will do. That situation though as you just saw it, if you really wanted to deal with Lucia fireballs, and you were in position, you can in fact use heavy uppercut to get through them. Will you actually hit? That will be about your practice. One other thing that helps a lot for Ken players in lag is that most of Ken's strategies don't rely on being able to see what your opponent is doing, making him one of the strongest in lag characters in the game. You simply don't need to see your opponent in order to do your main strategy. However, because of this, once you have been stuck by someone who can actually stop your jumps and low kick into jump setups, you are put on the opposite end. You end up with a relatively terrible character because he can't whiff punish anymore. And if you can't whiff punish, you're stuck dealing with a bunch of stuff that really isn't going to help you. This is a good setup, therefore. Now, we've had a lot of uppercuts, but now Lucia has meter, so she's almost to be V-trigger, so you don't really want to uppercut too much more now. Most of the time, you're aiming to get this done in such a way that will get her to the corner by the time you've done enough uppercuts. Because once you've got her cornered, she's not a terribly strong character. Ken's problem is that Ken's main offense flows will put him in the corner, and it'll set back up everything in a way that he probably doesn't prefer. But he can play pretty defensively from here, and not worry so much. leading to this. So honestly, that was perfectly executed on Chao Mao's side. You don't have to be able to play great footsies with Ken, and that isn't a slight on anyone. You generally shouldn't try so hard to play footsies with Ken, especially if you are only able to get matches against... If you're only worthwhile opponents, you have to fight them in lag. Don't put too much effort into your footsie game on Ken because it will just drive you crazy. You can practice your footsies and spacing and similar things on bots or on the few offline opponents you have. But if you want to perfect your timings, combos, and judgment of situations, don't spend too much time trying to play footsies properly with Ken online. All you're going to do is meet up on other people who aren't going to play footsies online, and it will make you doubly miserable. If you're lucky enough to find an opponent who is only somewhat laggy and will play footsies with you, sure, but no. That was a pretty good choice of movement. And that was not how I expected that to go. Because I know that she's airborne enough to get away, but no, I'm pretty sure I would have expected Ken to hit that. It might have been a timing thing though. So now she has no meter, and Chao Mao has all the meter, meaning that this is relatively simple. From Lucia's side, the answer is to play aggressively, which technically means that we're going back to the medium uppercut again. See? Probably would have saved him there. Heavy one worked because that was the range for the heavy one. And went for the sweep, which was the correct thing to do in that timing too. Okay, I'm not surprised that that reached actually. I think I knew that that would reach. Mainly because her hurt box gets extended more than most characters doing that style of thing. But now that I think about it, I can't think of what character that wouldn't have reached. I think there is one though.
It's go time.
And it looks like they're out. They have gotten their practice. And I have no idea how good the connection to this player actually is. But we'll see in a moment, probably. This one's the bigger problem. Usually when it's stable but low ping, you can get a good match. If it's unstable, even if it's occasionally high ping, usually this means it will be worse. Mostly because of the way netcode works in general, so unfortunately there's not a lot we can say here. Hopefully it won't be too bad. But even if it is, we're probably only continuing the stream for another 8 minutes or so. Therefore, it shouldn't be a problem. The lounge may stay open a bit longer, but as we haven't had a lot of people in lounge today, I'm assuming that both of the wolves in this case are tired enough that they probably won't be going on for too much longer. If you see that you like the look of this player, then by all means, hop in and fight them. But since we have a Platinum Lucia, we can more effectively discuss the previous concept. So again, Nikali can really just kind of bully his way through this matchup. If playing safe enough. And since her offense, while good, does not stand up to, uppercuts particularly well, there's not a whole lot to be worried about here. Perfectly spacing that is similarly effective. You just get a lot of mileage out of being able to just disc guidance and not have to worry a lot. That worked out well, but it's still expensive. You'll notice that tactically, there isn't much change here. This is largely better damage, which is always going to result in a win if you are playing relatively even with your opponent, and slightly more willingness on a specific form of offense. That one particularly. Being able to build up a lot of meter that way is really good for the matchup as a whole, but yeah, you're still going to run into this position. I think that jump could be treated as a bad option. Generally, you do have to be ready to uppercut when that's placed near you. Necalli's uppercut does go forward far enough, fast enough, that this will actually help him get through it. And I don't think he actually needs the invincible uppercut anyway. I think he can just do it with medium.
Round one. Fight.
But this player has managed to have that unfortunate effect of convincing our Necalli that a specific thing isn't a good idea, that it's not going to work. And that's a really bad situation to end up in fighting games, to have your opponent give you the impression that something that does work isn't working in general. It's more so that you're doing it wrong, or that you didn't do it perfectly to begin with, and your opponent just didn't know how to deal with the imperfect version either. But it's the same thing. You can definitely get through almost all of her stuff with the correct disguidance. This is one of those matches where if you are placed under this, generally you just want to use more of Necalli's EX stomp to solve the problem. But
Lucia wins.
Being put on the back foot and outthought doesn't really have much to do with the mechanical execution or the way a matchup actually works. It just ends up feeling that way when you aren't particularly strong at a specific thing.
Let's do this. Round one. Fight.
Most of the time when we talk about a mirror match, it's to say that both sides are trying to do the same thing and neither one will get an advantage. But when your characters have very long animation moves, and only the spacing is deciding whether or not it's a good idea. Even the mirror match is an actual fight, because it generally means that you're playing two slightly different characters based on whether or not you're the one advancing or not. In general, the advancing Lucia is at the disadvantage in this matchup. But since they can't both simply sit there and not do anything, understanding how to not end up having to be the one that advances is the answer. Which puts us back to the original perspective. If you can manage to force your opponent into the corner in whatever way, now you're not so much advancing as you are guarding. And that's a much better position to be in, even for this character with her relatively slower moves. You can also just play the mid-range in the same way. Because if you've decided, I'm not going to advance, your opponent is either advancing or you're both standing there and you can treat it as a corner guard situation anyway. In general then, if you are advancing, your goal probably isn't to actually hit your opponent, it's just to advance perfectly while pushing them back. Every time they fail to respond to your perfect advance, you will get a hit, and every time they do respond perfectly, usually by just blocking, you've probably put yourself a little bit further forward. They could take a big bet, make a big read, and hit you, but it's probably worth it because there's nothing else you can do normally. That's the point of this style of mirror match. If you take any particularly large actions, someone is going to figure out what to do about it. That, for example, being imperfect simply because it was missed. Even the differences in their V skills in this matchup, or V triggers, because of the character's style of play, it doesn't really come into too much. Despite the fact that V-Skill and V-Trigger 2 allow for slightly better approaching, Lucia can't afford to stay too close there because she'll still get beat up. If anything, it gives her more options for advancing perfectly, but the number of times you end up doing that in a round isn't really different. Leading to the other player still baiting you or trying to get things in the same way. They're still aiming to make sure that they don't get caught in your perfect advances, possibly get a whiff punish if they can. But with that mirror match, we have come to the end of our stream for the night. And so we bid you good night. We don't know what content we will be having in the upcoming days, and we definitely don't know whether or not that content will have me on mic, as I am going to get back into it, but we're still not sure about when and why. Since we have a lot of different weird things to cover this month, particularly, you're more likely to see us, or rather hear me, in March. Therefore, this has been really in 142MK. If you want to find the bots I was discussing, particularly our Ken bot, you can now visit our website 2-mk.org. And information on whether or not we are streaming is often available on our Twitter 2_mk_FGC. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.